Hey guys, welcome back to the Far Better Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Clark, and today we have another opportunity to study the Bible together. Whatever you're doing right now, I want to say thank you for taking the time to study. You could be folding laundry, you could be doing the dishes, you could be mowing the lawn. I don't want to know, I don't need to know, but I'm glad that you're taking the effort and time to study God's Word. We have been talking this season about far better by quitting. And that's kind of an interesting mindset to have, an interesting theme, I thought, for a season to put together. And we just finished last week talking with Bradley Smith and concluding our 4-episode arc on quitting error. And we've also had the opportunity to talk about quit complaining and quit running. Today, we're talking about quit quitting. And I'm sure that you are excited about that subject. I've got with me a guest here for Season 8, Episode 12, 162 overall. So, Haston, unfortunately, you also do not get to be on a milestone episode. Sorry. But Bradley wasn't either, so, it works out. But we have Haston Handley. Haston, take a minute. Tell us who you are, what you do for the network, and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Haston Handley. I am married to my wife, Chloe. As of recording, it will be 5 years and about 3 weeks.
Nice.
So we've been married what seems like no time at all and forever at the same time. I'm currently the preacher at the Pine Grove Church of Christ in Fulton, Mississippi, and a classmate of yours through school.
Yep.
Other than that, I am a jack of all trades, I guess, for the network.
Truth.
As a producer, and also I think my secondary working title is assistant or helper to the directors.
Sure. Yeah, assistant to the directors.
Yeah. Makes me feel like Dwight.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I've got the assistant to the regional manager thing up there on my bookshelf, so it works out. Maybe I'll just let you take that home with you. I don't know, but no, we do value the work that you do. Haston is in charge of analytics. That's his main area that he really works in and thrives in. And so anytime you have seen us post an update on how many downloads we have and what countries we're in and all of that kind of good stuff, if I've gone to your congregation and done a report on the network, which I'm able to do, if you're interested, you can email us and we'll do that. That all comes from Haston. And so Haston's job is an interesting one because a lot of times the way that I prefer analytics to be done is I want them pulled as close to midnight as possible so that I know the exact numbers for the day. And I've even at times said, I need you to pull analytics around 11:40, and that gives us some time. And we still lose on some downloads maybe doing that, but that's the first part of this. The second part of this, it always cracks me up too. We do a lot of math together, which I never wanted to be involved in math. I got into preaching to get out of math.
Same.
And yet, here we are, and we're like, okay, when we're close to a milestone, like when we were close to 200,000, I remember asking you to go back through, all right, let's look at the last 3 weeks of these specific podcasts that come out on Sundays. What were their typical downloads looking like? All right, adding all that together, is it possible for me to say that we will hit this benchmark minimum? Because I don't want to get up in front of a congregation and give the wrong numbers.
Right.
And so we do a lot of math together. We do a lot of figuring and trying to figure out what's what. And Chloe is a saint for putting up with all of that. And my wife is like, are you talking to Haston? Yes. And she just leaves the room because she knows it's going to be a while. And I'm pretty sure you said something similar with Chloe, that she just knows, okay, you guys are on the phone for a while.
If my phone rings anytime after 9 o'clock, she immediately knows it's you, and that will be at least 30 to 45 minutes.
Right. And so I am just truly blessed to have somebody that can do the work that you do, because I don't have the ability or the time. And the network we mentioned last week with Bradley, there's like 30 people that are involved in this thing, and a lot of times the people that are behind the scenes don't get the recognition that they deserve. And so I wanted to add some of those guys this season and put them in the forefront. And this is your first time being on the network as far as my show is concerned.
Yes.
And I'm glad that we have the chance to sit down together and do this because we were classmates.
Yeah.
We did experience the 2-year crucible of the Memphis School of Preaching, and we would do it again in a heartbeat. We loved the school and what it taught us, and we didn't quit. So there's a good tie-in to today.
Yeah.
Haston, when we talk about quitting, what in the world does that even mean?
So, I've heard it said of lectureships and things like that, never suggest a topic unless you want to be the one handling that topic.
Right.
And I'm realizing that now with this.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I mentioned it to you, you called me and said, "What are you talking about?" Essentially, the idea of perseverance, right? Mm-hmm. When we stop giving up on everything, we start bettering our lives.
Yeah.
Because it's almost cliche to say at this point, nothing worth having is easy.
True.
When we seek to live a Christian life that is far better, we have to stop giving up halfway through or even at the beginning. Because there's really nothing more that Satan wants more than for Christians just to give up. You know, we have so many obstacles in our life and so many temptations that it would be easy to give up.
Yeah.
But when we stop giving up and keep pushing forward, that's when really the Christian life starts to shine. And that's when we start building up all of the characteristics that we are to have. I mean, you think about how many passages talk about perseverance, how many focus on adding to your faith and building up so many different things that we have to objectively say a Christian is not a quitter.
Right.
There are times where we get discouraged. There are times where people put us down, where sometimes, unfortunately, we lose friendships because we have to stand for the truth. But Paul told Timothy to fight the good fight, not to give up in the first round. You know, boxing matches can go however long.
Yeah.
Don't give up in the first or second round because that's when your opponent has the most energy.
Right.
It's a war of attrition, and just keep going.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up boxing. Growing up, I loved the Rocky movies, you know, and Rocky 4 probably is the one that would fit this description the best because that's when Ivan Drago comes on the scene, kills Apollo Creed in the ring, and Rocky has to prove that he can beat this guy because he feels responsible for Apollo's death. And Ivan Drago is bigger, he's faster, he's stronger, he's roided up too because we found out they were cheating. Rocky didn't know that, but we did. And that fight starts, and everything is against Rocky. It's in Russia. It's Christmas Day. Everybody's cheering for Drago. And here is little tiny Rocky Balboa in this ring, and he is getting pummeled.
Yeah.
And yet he's somehow willing himself to keep fighting. And there's a famous part of that movie where he lands a cross, punch on Drago and cuts him. And all of a sudden you hear them going, he's cut, and he keeps going. And they sit him down because the bell rings, and they say, you see, he's not a machine. You can beat him.
Right.
And it's like that extra will. And as you're watching it, you're like, man, I'd go fight him right now and get destroyed, but I would enjoy it. But that mindset of not quitting is something that those Rocky movies were always kind of pushing, is keep going that extra round. There's one more round, just one more. We can do this. And that particular fight was like 15 rounds.
Yeah.
And he won the crowd over. And the famous joke is he ended the Cold War or whatever because he was able to win the Russian crowd over to himself, and they all cheered for him.
Right.
But that mentality is something that we find even in Paul's writings, where he says in Philippians 3:14, I press toward the mark. I'm straining toward the goal. I'm putting forth the effort and pushing forward, continuing to press because there's a prize waiting for me.
Right.
And it's also in Hebrews talking about discipline doesn't seem good in the moment, but when we are disciplining ourselves or disciplining children, whatever it might be, it's about that perseverance. Right. And as someone with 2 small children, one in particular who is his daddy's son, and he is just like I was, I have to often say to Adam, it is not a fight that you are going to win.
Right.
Daddy and Mama will win this fight. So you can either quit now, or you can go through it and realize we will win anyway.
Right.
And it won't be fun. Or you can just suck it up. And now we've got a 2-year-old who this morning I said, hey, let's go get dressed. She screamed no and ran into the other room. And I said, do you want a spanking? Do you want to get in trouble? And she said no. And I said, well, then let's go. No. Well, what do you have to? You have to discipline. You've got to give some concerted discipline. It's not abuse. It's something, and honestly, with the 2-year-old, it's a slight pop on the hand that wouldn't even hurt me.
Yeah.
But for her, it's the morality of, or the, just the demoralization of what, you hit me.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't. And it's that mindset of persevering where you're not going to win this fight. We're going to win this fight. We're the ones in charge. We're going to do this. God says to us, I'm in charge, and I'm telling you to persevere, but the devil's going to tell you to give up.
Right.
And I think about Elijah, an individual who was so ready to die after he had this great victory on Mount Carmel, and God says, you need to sleep because you've got to keep going, and it's not time for you to give up yet. And so as you think about this mentality of pushing forward and not quitting, I want to take a slight detour for just a moment in this and talk about preaching, because I think it's important to bring this up. We're both gospel preachers. I'm not in local work anymore, but I'm still a preacher, and I still go and preach and do what I can to spread the gospel. And we're noticing this preacher shortage. And a lot of it happens from people who have just left the pulpit. And I've started to tell some people, if everyone that left the pulpit would have stayed faithful, in some cases, some leave the pulpit because they go to denominationalism. Right. In other cases, they leave the pulpit because they were mistreated. Sometimes it's because the finances are not where they need to be and they can't make a living. But if everyone could have been able to stay in the pulpit for the right reasons and continue to preach the truth, we wouldn't have the preacher shortage that we currently have.
Right.
And I want to just give a moment to talk to somebody that's still in local work that gives us the mentality of persevering, because I know local work is not the easiest thing in the world to do. Right. I also know that it's a very enjoyable and valuable work. So it's kind of like a catch-22 of it's not easy, but it's also something that gives you a ton of value and benefit. So what would you say to these preachers right now that are on the fence about wanting to quit? What would you tell them?
Truthfully, preaching is extremely difficult, but it is so rewarding. On top of all of that, like you just said, if we give up, the truth is there are people we could be reaching that we're not.
Right.
We are taking ourselves out of the hurt of it, sure, but we're also taking ourselves out of the blessings of it. One thing, and it relates to preaching, it relates to so many other things in life, that I remember specifically from one of our instructors, Don Walker, who looked at me one day after offering, it might have been to pay for my lunch or something, and as I was one to do, said, no, you don't have to worry about that. And this statement has rung in my head throughout life. Don't take this blessing away from me. Mm-hmm. How often is it that we take the blessing of preaching away from ourselves because we get so wrapped up in the moment that we are more concerned about how we feel and about how this could look on us or our comfort in the moment instead of sticking with it and ending up at a better place or helping a congregation who might be the cause of your hurt, who might not understand that their lack of pay is actually hurting the preacher. Yeah. Because there are a lot of congregations that truthfully don't realize that. Who, I had a congregation tell me proudly, we still pay a preacher the same amount that we did in 1990. And this was in the mid to late 2010s.
Yikes.
It was a difficult thing, and then having a difficult conversation of, I understand that was good then, but now that's not even minimum wage.
Right.
it was a uncomfortable thing, but because of that, it has helped that congregation and therefore helped preachers to come.
Yeah.
Sticking with preaching might not be comfortable all the time. But think about, like you said with Elijah. He just stood on Mount Carmel and proved the existence of God to people who had fallen away. But he never looked at it objectively and said, God has failed me.
Right.
It was more, this bad situation is right in front of me. What's always been interesting to me is looking at the Bible logically. When we look at passages like, I press towards the mark, that means there is something that is taking the objective and making it difficult to reach. Because if not, Paul would have just said, I'm walking towards it, or I'm casually strolling towards it. This is a determination and a pushing forward, which means he's pushing against something. That could have been quitting, that could have been discouragement, that could have been anything. You look at Paul's life, 2 Corinthians chapter 11 goes into how much he suffered for the gospel's sake, and yet he said, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing, too. I wrote in my manuscript for the lectureship this past year, where are the men who will proclaim righteousness? Romans 10:13-17. Where are the men who will stand in the face of adversity and refuse to back down from preaching the truth? Acts 26:28 and 29. And you look at how Paul ends his life. And we often don't really talk as much about this, that the beauty of preaching has often taken a back seat to the remain faithful guide. That's fine. Yes, Paul's talking about remaining faithful, but Paul is talking about that I have preached the gospel faithfully. And it's amazing that the context of what he's saying, if you couple it with Proverbs 14:34, it implores our men to decide to preach the gospel, to make that decision of, I will do this.
Right.
Facing all of that adversity, facing all of those problems. And the life of a gospel preacher has so much value to those that we meet during ministry. I don't know how many of the stories could be told of people who, if the preacher had quit where they were, they would not be a Christian.
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking, you're listening to this podcast and you're on the fence about quitting, reach out to us and see if there's anything we can do to help you stay the course, because we need you. And if you're in the situation where you're thinking, you know what, I need to be a preacher, reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you about what to do and help you figure out what's the best fit for you and where do you need to go to school. We've got a good one here. Yeah. But I have told people before, if the best fit for you is somewhere else, as long as they teach the truth faithfully, man, more power to you. Go, and I'm going to be praying for you to be successful.
Right.
Whatever we can do to help, don't quit. That's the premise of this. And so you had down here, I don't know if you mentioned it already, but 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, the idea of that lion going around trying to get us. And I don't think that Peter intended for us to take from that the devil's not active in this world right now, but he walks around as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. That doesn't really make sense.
Right.
The devil is active. He is trying to get us. He is trying to come after us. And I have often told people in the invitations that I give, when I confess Christ, when I confess that he is Lord, I'm not just making a good confession. I'm putting a target on my back.
Right.
I am saying to the devil, you come get me. Because it's kind of like a dog. As long as you scratch its ears, as long as you're good to it, it has no problem with you. But the moment you stop, that dog will turn around and look at you as if to say, you have one job to do right now.
Right.
Well, as long as I'm on the devil's side and I don't quit the devil, then he has no problem with me. Right. He loves me. He's got me right where he wants me. But the moment I say, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. I don't need to be on your side. I should be on the Lord's side. Then I'm a problem.
Right.
And it's kind of like they often say in the movies, the problem needs to become eliminated. And that's what the devil will then become obsessed with doing. How can I get you to quit? And this happens not just with preachers.
Right.
But it also happens with our second question here. But before I get to that, is there anything else you want to add?
I had something pop up and it's gone now, so
okay.
You're good.
If you think of it, hit it. It'll be fine. I don't want you to quit.
Yeah.
What do we do when we notice the congregation seems to be quitting?
There are several things just off the top of my head. One command, there it is. Interesting point about bringing up Paul at the end of his life.
Yeah.
He is talking about fighting the good fight and finishing his course, but in that, he's also encouraging Timothy, a younger preacher, we don't know how old he was,
Right.
but younger, to keep preaching.
Yeah.
This is a man who's literally been beaten and presumably beaten to death.
Mm-hmm.
And he is looking at a younger person who he is mentoring and saying, it doesn't matter that I was beaten.
Right.
Go and preach.
Right.
You know, there are going to be obstacles. But in that, one job description of a preacher from Paul is to exhort, but it's also to rebuke.
Yeah.
A lot of times, well, obviously, a lot of times it's given by inspiration. Preaching needs to be complete. Sometimes a congregation needs to be encouraged and shown their good works.
Yeah.
Because a lot of congregations do good, but they don't see it. A lot of Christians do good, but they don't see it.
Yeah.
Because they're comparing themselves to another congregation or another people. But in that, sometimes we also have to warn and rebuke. Sometimes we have to be like last season you covered the 7 churches of Asia.
Yeah.
How many of those congregations received a very stern warning?
Yeah. 5 of the 7.
Right.
And you could even argue Philadelphia could have been considered as a sharp rebuke, not a stern
Right.
one, but just a sharp, hey, don't let go of that crown. And the Lord's not going to say something like that to a church that he doesn't think is thinking about it.
Right.
You know, so you could even make the argument that 6 of the 7 were given some type of rebuke and exhortation to change.
Right. And you have to have that, hey, something needs to be done because we are not acting like Christians. Because as Christians, we are given set specific things that we're supposed to do. Christ said, go and teach all nations.
Yeah.
He didn't say preachers go and teach.
Right.
He didn't say, I just forgot, missionaries.
Right.
He didn't say missionaries just go and teach. He said go and teach everybody to do that. In that, we have to realize every single person has the base objective to encourage, to warn, and to work. You even think about Colossians 3:16 with singing. We are to encourage and rebuke even in the songs that we sing.
Yeah.
Which means it's not just paying lip service to God.
Right.
We are singing songs to teach the others in the congregation. We have to be willing to warn and encourage. Keep up the good fight. Don't be weary in well-doing is another passage we could go to. It's just that idea of keep going.
Yeah.
And in that, we have to prepare the next generation of Christians. It is a sad statement that I have heard plenty of times before. I do not want to teach a young person how to be a better servant because no one taught me. Even though Titus chapter 2 is still in the Bible.
Yeah.
Titus 2, 1-6, older men teach the younger men. Older women teach the younger women to be all of these things that a Christian needs to be. We have to be teaching and we have to be encouraging even though there are times that we are discouraged. Even though there are times that a congregation might go through something tragic.
Right.
I've seen congregations who have pretty much given up because they can't keep a preacher.
Yeah.
No problem with the congregation or the preacher. It's just they were viewed as a quote-unquote starting out congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And they have trust issues. They have a lack of growth because objectively they've never gotten out of the getting to know the preacher stages. We don't need to quit as a preacher. Obviously, we just talked about that. But we don't need to be quitting as Christians even when difficult things come up.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of what we were talking about with the preachers too, and this also applies to just a congregation. The preacher can sometimes just feel like there's no point in going on and continuing. And Jeremiah felt that way in Jeremiah 20. We often just say verse 9, but I want to point out what he says in verses 7 through 9. O Lord, you induced me, and I was persuaded. You are stronger than I and have prevailed. But now watch what he says. I'm in derision daily. Everyone mocks me. For when I spoke, I cried out, I shouted, violence and plunder, because the word of the Lord was made to me a reproach and a derision daily. Then I said, verse 9, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more in his name. But his word was in my heart like a burning fire, shut up in my bones. I was weary of holding it back, and I could not. For I heard many mocking, fear on every side. Report, they say, and we will report it. All my acquaintances watched for my stumbling, saying, perhaps he can be induced. Then we will prevail against him, and we will take our revenge on him. But the Lord is with me as a mighty, awesome one. Therefore my persecutors will stumble and will not prevail. They will be greatly ashamed, for they will not prosper. Their everlasting confusion will never be forgotten. But the Lord of hosts, you who test the righteous and see the mind and heart, let me see your vengeance on them. For I have pleaded my cause before you. And now watch what he does here. Sing to the Lord. Praise the Lord. For he has delivered the life of the poor and from the hand of evildoers. Cursed be the day in which I was born, lest the day not be blessed in which my mother bore me. Let the man be cursed who brought news to my father, saying, a male child has been born to you, making him very glad. And let that man be like the cities which the Lord overthrew and did not relent. Let him hear the cry in the morning and the shouting at noon, because he did not kill me from the womb, that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb always enlarged me. Why did I come forth from the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days be consumed with shame? So there's this, both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord, see the Lord, but I'm still miserable. I'm still wondering, what is my purpose? What am I supposed to do?
Right.
How am I supposed to go on? And I think sometimes we look at the congregations and, not to rehash a season theme from last year or earlier this year, but Ephesus is the church that I think should come to our minds, where they had quit doing what they needed to do because they loved doing it as much as it was they knew they had to do it.
Right.
And knowing that can happen, there's a stark and sharp warning given that we cannot become that. And I think our problem often becomes we just kind of get caught up with other things, and the congregation quits doing what it should be doing. And one of the easiest ways that this has happened is that the preacher has become essentially tasked with being the success or the failure of a congregation. That's got to stop. Yeah. That's not how God intended it to be. That's not what God intended for this pattern to be set up. And I think that we mentioned this in the season earlier this year with the 7 churches of Asia. None of those letters said to the preacher of the 7 churches of Asia. Right. Not a single one of them were addressed to just the leadership. It was addressed to the church as a whole. All of you need to get this in order. All of you have to get this going. And there's a warning that we have to take, top to bottom, that we cannot allow something to change what we do as a congregation. We cannot quit.
Right.
Haston, you have anything else on that you want to add before we move on?
Objectively, just playing off of what you just said,
mm-hmm.
elderships can only do so much.
Right.
They cannot be with every single member every single day.
Right.
Neither can the preacher. We have to take personal responsibility for the gospel and for our faithfulness. Because if we just say, I don't have to worry about that, somebody else will, you're putting so much on the few that are doing something that it becomes a discouragement to them.
Yeah.
And just to add on to it, it's not just discouragement that I've seen with preachers or with a congregation. Something you just mentioned or hinted at is a major part too, and that's distraction.
Yeah.
Just casually letting something flow by because, I'm looking at this shiny new thing over here, or I'm comparing myself to this congregation over here. We miss everything that's happening at home.
Right.
We have to shift our focus back to looking at home, looking at the congregation.
Yeah. That's where it always starts and ends. And the distraction is a huge tool that the devil uses to try to get us where he wants us to be. So this brings us to the conclusion question, and it's a two-parter. We want to ask the question and talk about for just a moment, who are some who struggled with quitting and did not struggle with quitting?
Yeah.
What do you got on those that struggled with quitting?
Well, I already had it written down, thank you, so I'm not just bouncing off of you.
Right.
But Jeremiah.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at his life, there's a reason he is known as the weeping prophet.
Yeah.
There's a reason he wrote a book called Lamentations.
Mm-hmm.
He struggled with so many things. And you looked and read, he was on the verge of quitting.
Yeah.
In fact, if you just look at verse 9 as an isolated verse, which we should never do, but just look at that as a highlighted verse.
Yeah.
The first half, he is literally quitting.
Yeah.
He has quit.
Yeah.
Because you look at the second half that we love to focus on. He was weary with being held up. That means he had held up the word of God.
Mm-hmm.
He struggled with that. You look at someone like John Mark. He was a companion of Paul and Barnabas. You look at the greatest missionary duo to have ever done it. He was traveling with them, and for some reason, you can speculate whatever reason, he left.
Right.
He just hopped on a boat and went back home. Missionary work is tough. In fact, I just want to say this. I know a lot of missionaries who have struggled with discouragement, who have wanted to just throw it up and come home.
Yeah.
These two men, I picked specifically because you asked the question that struggled with quitting, not who just outright quit.
Right.
Both of these men kept going. Jeremiah, you pick back up at the second half of verse 9, he decided, I need to get back on the horse. I need to keep preaching.
Right.
Because God had given him a specific prophetic message. John Mark, 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul is now telling Timothy, bring Mark with you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see Mark. Even closer to the events, Acts chapter 15, Barnabas and Paul split ways because Barnabas wanted to take Mark with him. And they went out and presumably did great many works on their mission work after that.
Yeah.
They struggled with it. They looked at it. But the lesson that I want us to take from this is, even though it's tempting to quit, even if you have quit in the past, get back on it, man.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it takes swallowing pride, but there's a reason that we are commanded to be humble people as Christians.
Right.
Sometimes it does have to say, these people, I don't know, respect me the way that they should, but who cares?
Yeah. I think about Mark 14, verse 50. The Bible talks about Jesus is arrested, and we always harp on Peter, that dirty, rotten scoundrel Peter. But Mark 14:50 says, then they all forsook him and fled. Struggled with, they essentially were quitting in that moment because they were in the fight or flight mode, and they wanted to preserve their own lives instead. Now, to the credit of John and Peter, we know they ended up following from a distance, and John's even able to go in because of his status in the area that he was at. Peter, though, struggles even further with quitting at that point, because often the problem we've gotten with Peter is he's so back and forth. But here's the beautiful thing, that though Peter struggled with denying Jesus 3 times, they all struggled with forsaking and fleeing. After Acts 2, none of these disciples are wavering, and none of them are willing to quit. And they stand in the face of powerful men of their day and age and say, we're going to obey God rather than men. That's what Acts tells us. They stand in the face of powerful men and say, we can only teach the things we've seen and heard. And now all of a sudden, as they're being persecuted, as they're being hurt, and as they're being killed, even according to religious tradition, they don't change. They don't quit. They keep going. And I think it's incredible that the same people that could have been with Jesus and left him while he was literally there in front of him, The moment that he was no longer with them physically, they realized this is reality. This is the truth. We've got to keep going.
Right.
And I think we need to put that at the forefront of our minds, that we won't quit for the same reasons that they ended up not quitting. I don't know who might be listening today that is struggling with this idea of perseverance. But do remember that every single person that we talked about in Hebrews 11 is in Hebrews 12 too.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great place to kind of end this. And I'll throw it to you at the end here if you've got anything else you want to say. But Hebrews 12 is not really the chapter division the way that it should be. Because remember the old adage, when you see the word therefore, stop and see what it's there for.
Yeah.
And it says in Hebrews 12:1, therefore, because of all of this, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance. So don't quit. Quit quitting. Yeah. Run with endurance the race that is set before us, doing what? Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him didn't quit. You mentioned that. Jesus had every opportunity to quit, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. What is the goal, right? I just finished, at the time we're recording this, just a couple weeks ago, I finished my master's coursework.
Yeah.
The elation that I felt when I did that, and the ability to feel like, oh man, we did it. I got it. But I also have been privileged to coach some flag football teams, and one flag football team that I coached, we won the championship. And when we won that game, though it didn't make the news, it wasn't something that we were going out and buying rings and having some big ceremony for what we had done, to watch those kids cheer and get excited, and that 14-week journey that we went on together from the first practice to the final game was just so rewarding, because it was, number one, we didn't quit. We kept going. Number two, these kids accomplished something, and I had a small part in helping them do that. And it was so impressive when we had our little party at the church building, because that's what we would always do. All those kids were there. We had the trophy. They were all taking pictures with the trophy. And it was just so much fun to watch them realize that they didn't give up. But see, those first couple practices, they wanted to. Yeah. They were ready to quit. And we had a girl that went to Somerville. Her name's Addison. I don't mind talking about her. I've told her this to her face. But Addison hated running. Yeah. And every time you would do a drill, if you did not finish the drill first, you had to take a lap. Well, Addison was not very fast at the beginning of this season. She was very fast at the end because she ran a lot. Well, Addison hated running, and she comes up to me one day and she goes, "Why do you make me run all the time?" Yeah. I said, "It's good for you. Just trust me, it's good for you." So there was a game where she scored 4 touchdowns. She ran away from everybody. And she came off the field after the second touchdown. I said, "That's why you run." Right. That running builds that endurance in your body to be able to push forward a little bit farther, to go a little bit longer. And you can watch so many different sporting outings where that player wills himself. Michael Jordan in the flu game, and other players that have had difficulties, and they will themselves to play one more possession, one more minute, one more person. And that is impressive. And you think about the movie Hacksaw Ridge, where the guy says, "Let me just go get one more. Just one more." That's the whole goal. Quit quitting. Yeah. And press forward. Philippians 3:14. Haston, do you have anything else you want to say before we bring this to a close?
Just to reiterate what you've said, sometimes it is hard to keep going. I just finished a Wednesday night Bible class, once again at the time of recording, on portraits of people. There are so many people in the Bible. They're just that. They're people. They have hardships. They have problems. Some even struggled with different temptations and different sins, but they kept going. Right. You look at David. David kills Goliath. He gets brought into Saul's home. Everything looks great. And within just a short little while, he's on the run for his life. Mm-hmm. He could have just given up. but he ends up being a fantastic king. You look at Noah. Noah prepared an ark, but no doubt had so many people thinking he was insane for building an ark.
No doubt.
But he kept going. Hebrews chapter 12:1, we have to lay aside that weight.
Yeah.
That weight's not just the sin that's being mentioned, it is something else. We have to take off everything all that baggage we're carrying around as preachers, as congregations, as anything. And just say, it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be people as preachers that you really think they are on the verge of becoming a Christian who you never see again. But that should not affect, that just means I'm not going to teach another person.
Right.
You have to keep going. Run with endurance and never give up.
There has to be that mindset of pressing just a little bit further, just a little bit longer, and it'll be okay. Haston, thank you for being on the podcast today and the work that you do for Scattered Abroad as well as the Kingdom. We're grateful for it. Those of you that are listening to this episode and you're interested in what Haston's talked about with Pine Grove and some other places, we'll put all that in the show notes. And you did say Pine Grove, right?
Yeah.
I know too many groves. I always get them mixed up.
Yeah, you're good.
I think it's Bradley's at Hickory Grove.
I believe so.
I think. And he was last week. So, that,
right.
Which was yesterday for me. But
and a few miles north of us, there's Piney Grove.
Okay.
So that's even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the congregation, right? Just the mentality of the name, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're terrible.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, those names, that's always hard. Like
right.
There's Williams Chapel and Doris Chapel.
Oh,
and they're not even in the same state. But I always, with Bradley, get them mixed up.
Right.
I'll always say, I'm supposed to be at Doris Chapel in Kentucky. He's like, you mean Williams Chapel?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. So, forgive me. But all of the information, correct information, will be located in the show notes, as well as our link tree, our website, our Facebook page, our Instagram. You can find us on Substack and follow the blogs that we're doing. You can download the Scattered Abroad Network master feed on all major podcast platforms if you're interested in having every single show in one. I've been going through and listening to all of the old episodes. I've been enjoying that, and it has been very helpful to have that resource. There's over 560 episodes on there right now and counting. And this is episode 12 of our season, which means there has been quite a lot more added since we've recorded this because we're early right now. It's May when we're recording this, and this is coming out 12 weeks after August starts. So, we're doing good. That'd be October.
Yeah.
So,
we're looking around Halloween.
Quite a bit has come out since we've even done this. So there's probably over 600 episodes now on the master feed, but it's where you can get all of the shows. If you want each individual show, you're welcome to do that as well. We would love it if you'd leave us a rating and a review. And if you're interested in knowing more about the Scattered Abroad Network or the Memphis School of Preaching, you can email us at san@msop.org and set up a one-day Sunday. What I normally do is I'll come out, I'll give a report on the work we're doing in the Bible class, and then I'll handle the sermons for that day. A lot of times congregations will choose to do that when their preacher's going to be out of town and they need somebody to fill in. That is my job. That is literally what I'm supposed to do. And so if you'll let me come do that, I'd be happy to do that. One last thing I want to say before we close is that we offer tours on the campus of the Memphis School of Preaching. So if you're interested in doing that, you can also reach out to us at admissions@msop.org. We'll take you around, take you to lunch, and give you a chance to see what MSOP is all about. Don't forget, as we close this episode today, let's remember to please God now so our eternity can be far better.